VenomousStare returns with another Starcraft 2 video. Last time we spoke about the ins and outs of the replay client, hotkeys, what to look for when you lose, why you lost certain games, how to unzip pro replay packs, everything you could possibly want to know about the Starcraft 2 replay client was covered in my last video. Check that one out no matter what level you're at, because it's very important when it comes to improving. Starcraft is a game that really requires a lot of inward reflection and watching your own VODs. It's not a team game with a lot of random factors, and improving is all about looking inward. Today we're going to be talking about how to identify and counter aggressive play. I'm going to be using a 2v2 replay because 1v1 is very formulaic and figured out, and if I was going to do 1v1 guides, I would really get things down the build order very crisp and sharp. The reason I like to use 2v2 is it's actually a way better game mode at illustrating basic RTS concepts that we can actually try to reflect upon and use to improve. A lot of 1v1 is going to be more cut and dry in terms of, oh well, he had this, he got supply blocked here. Whenever there's two people on each team, there's more leeway. So the first thing about stopping aggressive play is identifying it. And it's me and the blue Zerg player up here in the top left, Chihuahua. We're both Zerg, and this guy's not my friend, he's just some random, but he's a solid player. This is the sort of double Zerg setup where both of the Zergs get super early third bases. Zerg players love their drones, they love their queens, and they love their third bases. And this is going to be an extremely important detail, because whenever you consider 2v2, you have to remember that in a 1v1 game, a guy can only do so many different builds in terms of, even if he wants to do insane, ridiculous proxy 2-port or cut workers, even though StarCraft gives you all the tools in the world you can possibly fathom to be creative, he's still confined to the limits of his race and one base income. 2v2 is a little bit different because you can do stuff like money dumping, and crucially you can get hit with stuff 2v1 like Hellion Ling Bane that you're obviously never going to play against in a 1v1 game, because it's just one race. If it's Zerg versus Terran and you're facing a Terran, you're sort of aware of what he can do, but when it's 2v2, there are a lot more weird combos and things that can be thrown at you. So because it's not so mapped out and formulaic, I actually think it can be a better teaching tool. So in order to identify cheese, you need to scout it early. So my ally went for a bit of early Ling pressure here. This isn't necessarily a cheese or an all-in, because notice the production tab, he's droning behind it. But he was trying to scout around the map. And because I peeked my Overlord in here, we can see I'm going to peek an Overlord in, and what do I see? 3 Zealots. That's really abnormal at 3 minutes. That's incredibly rare. You're really only ever going to see 1 Zealot, or 1 Zealot and then another unit like a Stalker or a Sentry or something like that. 3 Zealots is super weird because it indicates that he has multiple gates and he's gearing up for aggression. If ever you see 3 Zealots this early on, it screams, I'm doing multiple gate aggression. It almost always starts with 2 gates, and then they can go into more tech, as we see this guy doing, went into Twilight and Warp Gate. But essentially, because this is, like in many ways, StarCraft is a game about information, so seeing these Zealots, even though it's like, oh, 3 Zealots as opposed to 2 or 1, who gives a shit? Well, this tells us all we need to know. This is an extremely crucial piece of information that is going to help us puzzle out what the enemy is doing, and crucially, not lose the cheese. Because countering cheese, aka aggressive or unorthodox play that is reliant on you not scouting, that's what cheese is. Some weird shit that someone does and it relies on you not figuring it out. And oftentimes cheese and rush sort of get coupled together. That's because if someone's rushing you, in the same way that if you don't scout it like a cheese, you're going to die. So 3 Zealots early, it's 100% early aggression from Protoss. And honestly, this probably means he doesn't have an expansion. 4 Zealots this early. And you can see you're typing in my ally, typing to chat, and typing to my ally in chat rather. Don't attack, because whenever you go for early lings and the other Zerg player has more lings than you, you have to remember, with Zerg, everyone's limited to larva that plays Zerg. They have the larva restriction. So this means that you either have to choose lings or drones. So if you scout a guy and he has a fuckload of lings, it means he's not making drones. And a lot of StarCraft, as far as scouting cheese and aggressive play, is just sort of deducing what your opponent should have and what they don't have, and saying to yourself, well, something is off. Like, let me give you an example. So you might be saying to yourself, well, I haven't played enough of the game to like know what is off, and that's a big reason why I went into the replay in my last video, is because I wanted to really show people what to look for. So if we're just sort of considering, well, if I scout someone, I don't know like how much he's supposed to have. Well, we scouted and saw crucially that this player had no workers. This just screams aggression. He's cutting workers in favor of attacking units. And if we don't really understand, like, oh, well, I don't know how many workers he's supposed to have, we can see I have 4 here, but I'm also showing Bane Nest, multiple spines at my front door. This guy's skipped the spines, just has the Bane Nest, no workers. So, and you have to remember that I have gone into lings here too myself, so I can deduce based on the fact that I have more drones than he does, and that he has no drones at all in his natural when he should have about 5, that he has to be spending the larva on something else. Can't really be roaches this early on, so you have to deduce and figure out what's going on. And obviously the lack of drones and lack of natural for the Protoss and all those early zealots allowed my ally and I to say, okay, it's aggressive. And crucially, we both cancel our thirds, because A, those thirds would have died and we never would have been able to hold them in a million years, and B, if a big push like this is about to hit you and they have this much stuff, a lot of times someone might say like, oh, well, don't you want to like leave it and then cancel it to buy time? This isn't going to buy you any more than 5 seconds, and if you lose it, it's catastrophic if you mess up the cancel micro. And more importantly, if you cancel right here, when my ally and I did, like, we see the big swell coming, still has no drones at his natural, still has no natural at all for the Protoss. So here you have to say, and here notice that my ally and I are actually thinking on the same page, and this is how you can tell he's actually somewhat intelligent. And he was the guy who did the majority of the scouting, even though I peeked in with the OV initially. Good players will actively scout without being asked to and get map control without being asked to. Bad players play with the map covered in fog of war, and that's not just for Zerg. So at this point, we know, ding, 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 it's an all-in for Shizzle. So, no way we're holding these thirds, and if we cancel them now, we can actually use the money on units, because the way Zerg macro works, when you do the super early third build, you don't have any gas coming in at all, and really you're just going to have next to no queen support and just some naked, no upgrade lings. So when you go ahead and cancel that third, suddenly you go ahead, you not only you save the drone, which is actually a big deal when the worker counts are this low, and you can start to spine up. Crucially, when both people cancel the third and someone's not like a selfish cretin and is like, defend my third that's not even done, both players can just spine up together. Or if it was another race, same concept, like bunker, tank, double batteries, couple sentries. In fact, with Zerg, like, it's actually, I think, the hardest to hold. It would be easier with those other tools. So remember, this is a ground rush. This isn't like Proxy Oracle or like Proxy Robo, where he's going to fly in with an Immortal or DT drop, aka all your defense can be out here at the natural. You don't have to fucking worry about making stuff in your main. Although, hilariously, because it is Ling-based aggression, both my ally and I make a spine in the main. But what I really meant was, like, you don't have to worry about being backstabbed by an Oracle. There's no Spore. There's really no build where people are going to open, like, heavy gate, like, super heavy gateway aggression and then go Stargate as well. Those builds are outdated. Those builds really we saw from players like MC in early 2011, as well as QXC in early 2013, and the concept of that was like a 4-gate proxy Stargate bust, where you chrono out 2 voids and make like stalkers and bust a Terran. That build's like really, really bad in 2v2 though. Builds that are contingent upon like people just being sort of surprised and dying, especially as Terran, are way less good in 2v2, because you have to survive and crush 2 people. So this video is about identifying early game aggression, and let's just talk about reiterate the points that how we knew this rush was coming. Remember, no drones, no natural. So at that point, it's okay to cancel the third. Don't say to yourself, I'm going to be behind if I cancel my third. You have to say to yourself, there are an insane amount of lings coming at me, and there's no way in hell I'll be able to hold with my third. So even if I cancel it, holding here is the only thing that matters. That's what I really want to stress. When someone is doing a downright and dirty, complete all-in on you, you can actually go to certain extremes that you would never go to at any other point in a StarCraft game to hold. So when we see a downright and dirty, complete all-in like this, don't be afraid to cancel your third. It's that important. Because you know how you lose a Zerg? You don't cancel the third, you have all your lings run out and die trying to defend, and then suddenly you hit fucking units tab right when they're pushing you and you don't have anything. As Zerg, whenever you're getting pushed with these big scary attacks or rushes you're not ready for, the key is not to engage as soon as you see them. The key is to delay, make more shit, mass up, wait until they're absolutely committed on creep, wait until the last possible moment, maybe even mix in a counterattack and then hammer them. Also, when you're going for a spine crawler centric defense, it's really important to fight like on the spines. You don't want to let them get all the way up into your main, which is why the spines in the main is really intelligent. If this was like a roach based all-in, you wouldn't ever need this, but for a ling based all-in, yeah, I guarantee this retard with 1,000,000 fucking speedlings is going to try to run them in your main at some point. But since using a spine-centric defense, the crux of the issue is you don't want to fight way off of the spines. If it looks like you're doing well up here when they attack into the spines, don't be an idiot and run all your stuff out here and lose it all. Okay, so here, crucially, whenever the Zerg player backed off there with his Ling Bane, it was very obvious that he like wanted the Zealots to tank all the Banes so he could run in. So I ran one Bane back, and this is sort of sloppy shit show micro, but like this is one of these things where like, oh, he's actually just gonna run in 8 Banes alone, and because it was such like a stupid move I wasn't ready for, I mismicroed a little bit. Whereas like a good player would have like split his lings up and tried to snipe off the Banes, because the proper way to do that all in that he did is to like when all the Banes start to waddle up and run in, you fucking run in with all the lings at the same time. It's not like a both type thing. Like if we watch his micro, like first of all, anytime you're doing a Ling Bane all-in against a Zerg and they have this sort of SimCity, spines next to hatcheries, roach warrant, like basically they're minimizing surface area. It's really hard to break your opponent, and a lot of times you're going to be better off just backing up and using the lings for map control. Because the Zergling player, like, he basically wants to swarm in to the unsuspecting opponent, surround everything, and kill them. This sort of congested, wally defense absolutely decimates Ling all-ins. And whenever your opponent also has Banes and Queens, forget about it. Because this sort of Brood War-esque SimCity also works really well against Zealot-based aggression too. Zealot-based aggression. In the same way that we see lots of spines sort of being put behind hatcheries in macro games and Brood War against Protoss, it's the same concept. The Zealots really have a hard time getting to the stuff they want to get to, especially range units. And we can see here, this is a classic Zerg versus Zerg macro technique you should copy. You build, so obviously like ZVZ you're going to hatch first, you herp-de-derp, you get your speed, but with the next 50 gas you build your Banley nest at your natural 2 squares away to like the hexes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 hexes away from the hatch. Then you can fit a spine in there, and then when your opponent tries to be aggressive at your natural, which will happen at like every ZBZ, they can't focus out your spine. And also you can park your queen up next to it to minimize surface area. ZVZ, especially against obnoxious opponents, is a lot about minimizing surface area. Here's a similar macro technique you should do, except this is a 1 square pixel. The queen is a 1 square. Similar concept, makes it almost impossible for Lings to surround this money unit. I watched Scarlet do this and actually played against people on ladder that did this, and it makes it so much harder to cheese them out. And for stupid little aggression like this, like dumb little 4-gate speed lot cheesy builds, 2 guys sim sitting properly is like night and day difference. Also the third canceling. That's one thing that I really can't harp on enough. If someone is truly going all in and balls deep, don't think to yourself sort of myopically like, well, if I cancel this I'll be too far behind to win just because you do it every game. No, like here's what needs to happen. You need to say to yourself, if I leave that third going, is there any way in hell I'm going to be able to hold? And if the answer is no, then fucking cancel it and play a weird game from behind. And the interesting thing about whenever you're being all-in, and it's the sort of all-in that can be stopped with a bunch of spines, which is like sort of rare because so many of the builds now can circumvent that. You can actually move the spines down onto your third once you retake it, which is really cool. This is especially true in 2v2 with double Zerg. So this is my idiot ally. A lot of times you hold off a cheese. Oh, I'm going to counter. Well, a lot of times they're just going to keep making units because they're dumb. The intelligent thing to do here would have just been to like right click on this or just scout around. But instead, he just runs into a choke and loses his map control. Now these are my Lings. I think the split color is confusing, especially when you play, but I'm purple. And notice how I got the Stalker and I left, and now I'm going to scout. You don't want to be the sort of person, especially with Zerg, who sees a tiny little opening and thinks to themselves, oh, I got to kill him here. You will lose so many more games than you will win with that mentality. We can see here a lot of me typing in all caps and rarely ever like correctly getting it right. 2 more spines coming as my earlier ones died. And this is one thing about early game aggression, especially in ZBZ, is when one guy's trying to be an obnoxious prick with Lings, if you get like a dozen roaches, especially with +1, it makes it way harder for him to do anything, especially when you start blocking off chokes and stuff, making little walls. One of the best micro tactics you can do in ZVZ is like putting 4 roaches next to each other and putting them in a hold position. And if you get +1 attack with your roaches, it'll work in the same way that +1 attack works with zealots against Lings, where it'll be 1 less volley and it'll be incredibly powerful. So here a follow-up all-in is occurring, and a few things need to be noted. Neither one of us have committed to retaking our third, so it's going to be super easy just to hold this follow-up all-in. Just play at the top of your ramp. Remember, going up high ground is disadvantageous for your opponent. It's better for you to sit at the top of high ground. So you want to... This is sort of like a Tal'Darim altered style ramp where like yes it's a choke and a ramp, but it's not like a true like going down ramp. But anyway, again, don't be stupid and fight off of creep, fight off of your spines. Remember, we have workers and like we're teching up and we have our creep spread is better, so on and so forth. Like the Protoss really doesn't have any tech. The onus is on them to finish the game. They are myopically focused on continuously attacking and all-inning. The Zerg players in blue don't feel obligated to, like right here when you chase away his stalkers, don't idiotically keep running and get cut off by the Zerg army. Like this is obviously what the red Zerg wants. He wants me to keep fucking chasing. And look at that, I run away. A big part of that's creep spread, vision. Creep spread's the fucking backbone of the Zerg race. You have to get really good at spreading creep if you want to be good at Zerg. Speaking of which, my tumor dies. So here, if we just go to their vision, there's no third here. Walking around to this side with this fucking choke's not going to do him any good. And don't forget the reinforcement points right fucking here. So, the way that they're hoping this goes is both of us are on Ling Bane, maybe skipping Bane. They walk up the choke with Banes, kill all the Lings, and then just fucking walk forward with Protoss units that have, you know, obviously charge and blink. But this is why whenever you're playing defensive, like, you want to leave these rocks up, because it's harder for your opponent to tack up into a choke, obviously. Like I said, this video is targeted towards new players. A lot of people have no fucking idea how to play the rocks, whether to kill them, whether to leave them. So whatever. And a shitload of roaches and spines is essentially the absolute worst thing that this team could have possibly fucking asked for. And Reno is going to try to run away. And an intelligent player, whether they're all-inning or not, would be continuously double pumping workers. Because in Starcraft, a lot of times you're not going to be able to kill your opponent outright by doing a certain attack or strategy, but you can do crippling damage to them. However, if you're not getting ahead in your own regard, if you're like this dim animal and you haven't been producing workers for the last fucking 3 minutes, then you're going to find yourself in a position like this, where, like, did the red team prevent the blue team from taking their thirds? Yes. Did they make them make a lot of non-drone units? Yes. Did they put them behind in some ways? Yes. But this is like, I'm gonna pause the video, even though this is a short concept, just to like really like put emphasis on this. The concept of momentum in StarCraft has to do with how many workers you make. Not, oh, I did this attack and like I prevented his third and like it's fucking 8 minutes in the game and their 2 Zergs don't have a third. Like, we're winning. They had to make a bunch of spines and shit. We're winning. Winning would be coming back to like this base being 75% of the way done instead of just started, and you literally have 48 workers. 48 workers. It's very easy. 2 base saturation. You don't even have to chrono. All this guy had to do was, you know, have 2 workers queued up in each nexus while he was doing this corn dog push. Super easy to execute. But this is the backbone of StarCraft 2. Players like this, if he doesn't improve his macro, will never really advance above like 3500 MMR. He'll be completely reliant on tricks and gimmicks to win. And you can actually be a player that does exclusively tricks and gimmicks, but if you just do the basics of macro correctly behind it, you can be way more lethal. As we can see. See, like, the crux of this issue is because this idiot wasn't making workers. And this is what you'll find a lot of times with cheesy, aggressive players, is they make more macro mistakes than players who fucking practice macro every game. So instead of having 16 workers on the middle line, he has 5. That means his follow-up cheese to Stargate is delayed, and everything else, including follow-up gates and like any shield batteries he could have had, all that shit, all that stuff is also delayed. So my ally here is going to come in and try to big dick around. So whenever you play cheesy players like this, we've spoken about how to identify after cheesing you. Too many aggressive units in the early game, too few workers, scouting in general. You know, any idiot can say like, well, why don't you just scout? Well, it's not always going to be as simple as looking in their main. So here Chihuahua should just right click on this, and we'll be way ahead. Players who go for cheeses, like these 2 guys in the red, oftentimes the follow-up thing that they do will be predicated on you not scouting it or you simply not being ready for it. In other words, these guys didn't have the units out to hold that natural. they assumed based on their cheese and the fact that we would sort of be reeling and not have our shit together that they would be able to get away with it. And cheesy Protoss players especially use this tactic where they throw you off balance and then they do shit that they really shouldn't be allowed to do behind it. And they're just saying to themselves like, yeah, he's gonna be fucking looking at his base. He's not gonna be ready. So this is what I was talking about. The spines get moved down to the 3rd. So if you're playing an aggressive person, you really don't have to worry about overmaking spines if you've scouted the fact and confirmed that they're cheesing. So remember, the really backbone of our logic whenever you're facing a cheesy aggressive player who likes to go for one all-in and do another is because a lot of times stuff like this will happen. They will show up with a weird amount of weird units that you weren't expecting, and you won't be ready at all. So the blue player, Chihuahua, has no spores. Or wait, I gotta fucking do that. Alright, Chihuahua, he does have spores. Okay, but he doesn't have spores at his 3rd. And I have fucking spores at every base. In general, so you might be saying to yourself, if we look at your vision, why'd you build spores? You're like, we know they have Stargates, so the spores sort of makes sense, but the reason you build spores, but like, I wonder if I remember building them, but I don't remember if I remember seeing the voids before I built them. I remember building them blind, and the point being that I have to ask myself, what can we lose to here? So we see the voids and the spores. So the spores come basically right at that time. So regardless of whether or not the voids are scouted, let's just say all the roaches like died here to something else and we never see the voids. I have to ask myself, with the vision I have on the map, let's go to my vision. With the vision I have out on the map, like, what could I lose to, right? Because, like, we know that, like, this base and this base have been fucked with, and the natural's been fucked with. So the idea that they're on, like, a bunch of... Notice how I have this Ling patrolling? It's looking for hidden bases. And this Ling is patrolling as well. Patrol is a very underrated command. So I am limiting the capabilities of things that can come at me. I know that they don't have the fucking corner bases. Sometimes whenever your opponent seems to be behind and they like lose their 3rd and you're like, why is this idiot still in the game? They have so much stuff and they won't die. They're fucking hiding a base on you. So clicking out a Ling like this and patrolling it is insanely good in 2v2 and 1v1. But when you're playing cheesy people, it's so good because if someone cheeses you and it fails like they're pushed it up here, what are they going to do to follow up? Let's consider. They could do a follow-up cheese, which they're probably going to do in some sense. They could sneak a base to try to come back in the game, or they could just play a straight-up macro game from behind, which I will say is like very unlikely. It's rare that someone is going to like open with the cheese, like unprovoked, like, oh, I'm going to cheese you, and like see and like consider that probably do it in every fucking ladder game they play. So what do you have to do whenever you're playing against them? Consider that people who go into every ladder session like that, like, oh, just cheese, these motherfuckers are gonna follow up cheese. They're not gonna open with like a risky coin flip and be like, I guess I'll fucking play from behind now. No, they're gonna go up into a follow up all in. They're gonna go into another high risk play, one that tries to take advantage of you being off balance. And that's what this is doing. This muta play, it's basically saying, this guy hasn't really invested anything into units. He did like the 4 spores and played greedy, couldn't get a 3rd. Now he's going 2-hatch muta. And essentially, this guy's saying to himself, I'm going to show up at their base and like the spores aren't going to be ready because like the mutas had already like popped before the Stargate units were revealed. So let's see what happens. This is sort of scary if we go to units and see like the Zerg players don't have shit. We turn it back, yeah, the blue Zerg players don't have shit. Remember, all these air units are coming in unsuspected. So this is another one of those moments, like when you play a cheesy player, and this happens all the time in Starcraft. Let's look at my vision. I see a bunch of air units I can't fucking kill. If we go to structures, my spire sort of just finished, and my macro is just kicking in. And I don't really have the capability to defend this with spire units. What am I going to do? Like make 6 corruptors? The mutas fly away ad nauseum, the voids counter corruptors. Am I going... My macro is not bad. I'm not floating 1500. I can't... The guy already has like 8 mutas because he did a surprise tech switch. I can't catch up in muta with another person going air and keeping air dominance. So I have to queef out as many mutas as possible and stall and make a bunch of spores at my bases, because the crux of the issue is going to be them trying to end the game and fighting on spores, because I'm never going to be able to counter double air alone after this guy already has the muta advantage. Back in 2013, 2014, Zerg vs Zerg was all muta versus muta. Who was flapping more wings, as In Control called it. And essentially what you need to know about this is upgrades are really important. A 1 or 2 muta disparity whenever they fight is actually a huge deal. And essentially, once one person incurs an advantage, muta number wise, it can be hard for the other person to come back. So I'm not in a position where I can fucking fly in with 5 mutas and try to fight, especially with the voids. Already, this position where it's like, oh, he has 14 mutas before you could get 1 out, holy shit, that's almost insurmountable. You get down by like 5 or 6 against someone your skill level, it's fucking tough. So I have to do spores to catch up. And here's the other thing. Whenever you're in a position like this where people who are cheesy and show up at your base with stuff you aren't expecting and can't counter, what are you going to do? Well, they can sit on your chest ad nauseum, throw the game into chaos, fuck you in the ass repeatedly, and never have to worry about anything because they surprised you. Or you can counterattack in some way or put pressure on the other side of the map to at least put a timer on their aggression. Make it where maybe they have to recall. Maybe they have to stop reinforcing and use the reinforcements to defend. Maybe they have to pull back entirely. So, because I was sitting here with like 16 lings and saying to myself, well, the lings aren't going to be good against double air, instead of like panicking and losing them or just having them idle, I said to myself, if I can counterattack with lings and get map control while this occurs, it's going to buy my spores time to get up. Now, even if neither person reacts to the ling counter, then it's still going to buy me time, and it's still going to do damage counter-wise, which, remember, they're never going to kill us here, like truly kill us. Like, they can do severe damage, and if I don't counterattack, they can keep expanding and win off of the damage. But in terms of like literally wipe both of us with one guy with the Hydrogen and one guy with the Spire, they're not going to win outright with this push. Therefore, remember, StarCraft isn't about like outright winning with one tactic or maneuver. It's about like getting ahead with tactics and maneuvers and macroing behind it. So if I can prevent that with this paltry amount of units, then that essentially means that like this horseshit that they're doing is all window dressing. And remember, because I have lings patrolling, I'm able to see the bases as soon as they go down. Whenever you're playing people like this, the worst thing you can do is play on a completely fog of war map and let them do whatever they want, and let the game just be lurching from one series of surprises to the other, and you're always on the back foot. That's how these fuckers like to play, these cheesy aggressive players. And they exist in all races. You have the parade pushing bio Terran that cuts corners and doesn't scout. You have the air toss, and you have the ling abuser into muta, so it's not like a race specific thing. And notice how much work the spores are going to do here. It's a lot of damage on the voids. Remember, spores do bonus damage to bio, so if the voids are the real scary thing here. If you can make it simply mutaverse Muta versus 2 Zergs, 1 Hydra, 1 Muta, it's way more manageable. So see, because the counterattack occurred, and this is one thing you should do with counterattacks, is shift A moves, so when they get done fucking one thing up, they go to the next. I've halted the push. Just by counterattacking, I've not only like saved my idiot ally's natural, who he has no spores, he would have gotten ripped to smithereens, but I prevented him from taking a third again. And I really want to prevent this base too, because a lot of times when you're playing against players like this who are really abusive, especially air Protoss players, if they get this base up and get like a handful of cannons and batteries, it's like unkillable. So if you can run in obnoxiously and snipe it a couple times, suddenly they're not able to get the critical air backbone, and you can just run them over in the mid game before they have the critical mass. Whenever Protoss reaches like 8+ carriers with support and their allies simply breathing in at the keyboard, holy shit, it becomes so brutal because it's almost impossible to attack. So here I run in and kill a lot of overlords. Now I have a dozen mutas and he has 14. It's also worth noting that he has the defender's advantage because his reinforcements are going to come in closer. So what happens if we go to the units tab? So I don't have everything I have here. It's 12 and he has 2 more, so 14. So what's brutal about Muta versus Muta is if ever you get caught out because they're the same speed, you can't really escape, and it's just a shitty snowballing thing that really it's the reason they... This is why the Spore does bonus damage to bio. This is the single reason, because Blizzard wanted Muta versus Muta out. So here it's hard to tell because of the fucking tree and his skin, his stupid Muta skin that should be able to be disabled. But I sort of deduce here that I had less Mutas than him. And the fucked up thing is like, even though I was right, because I had an upgrade advantage, it would have been better off just sitting here with my dick in my hand, and it looks way worse than sitting there with my dick in my hand and attacking. But like once that happens, because of the nature of the glaive, it actually snowballs super hard. So I didn't want that to happen. And I noticed he had 2 red mutas, and I thought he was going to catch up to me anyway, and I tried to snipe him, and I fucked myself in the ass and essentially lose my entire muta flock. And at this point, like, this is a big part of why, like, I will sometimes cast 2v2 games as opposed to 1v1s, because, like, a cretin who's never played 2v2 might ask, like, well, why are you casting 2v2 if you're trying to teach the game? Because if this is a 1v1, never, ever, ever in a trillion years could you ever go back into Muta if you were the blue player here. You would have to literally go Infestor or Viper, so... Since this video is about scouting with aggressive play and dealing with aggressive players, let's just sort of think about what we've seen so far. So we scouted the early game aggression and defended accordingly, and were able to hold the first push. Then a follow-up push occurred where a surprise tech unit was revealed, and that dealt a little damage but was sort of subdued with the counterattack. And after you fail 2 sort of cheeses or 2 all-ins in a row, we can see the worker tab here. The Protoss has a measly 28 workers. That's what happens when you fall behind and rely on cheese to win, and your macro's sort of bad and you can't properly produce. My ally Chihuahua's a little bit behind, but he'd be pretty much dead if I hadn't have saved him with the counter, and this would be one of those fucked like 2v1 games that's really sort of still like 2v2 because one person from each team is kind of dead. So because my macro is so much better than him, and I've held the pushes, and I have better upgrades, and I'm more diligent, I'm the better player, but I've been making workers and taking bases and have better map control than him, I've been able to make 11 mutas, which about matches his total. And really, I don't want to make the same mistake as before. Again, the skins make this really hard to judge and are like really imbalanced. So what I want to do is essentially just fight over a Spore. And even if he has a couple muta advantage, if I can just get him to gargle a handful of Spore shots, it's close enough where I'll be fine. And we can see here he does, and that's fine. And finally, remember when you're playing cheesy players, it was like I said, where a lot of times they're going to be doing greedy stuff that they can't really afford to do behind the scenes, sort of hoping that you're never going to be able to scout, praying that because you're so thrown off and focused on re-droning or clearing their cannon rush or whatever, that they can just take bases like this. But this is a great example of, like, if this had gone on for 2 or 3 more minutes, suddenly it's shield batteries and cannons, and it's a huge bitch to take because the Zerg parks a couple lurkers up here. But this is what you want to do to players like this. Snipe bases and retreat. And then if they overextend and you get an advantageous fight, pick off money units. But Chihuahua played that perfectly, from sniping the base to running away to only then turning. And see, even though me and this guy aren't partied up, this is perfect 2v2 teamwork. So he's pressured over here and caused this guy to lose a base, and I know the Toss army is over here. I also know, because he lost the base and just the way 2v2 works and how synergy works, you don't want your ally to continuously like get fucked and lose the same thing. You want to help him out. So I know the Zerg is either bringing like his whole army over here or leaving some of it. So even though I figure that this guy, the Red Zerg Overwork, has spore crawlers, I'm going to run in and do a little bit of a counterattack when I know my ally is pressuring the map. And even though I don't really expect to get a lot of kills, it's just a matter of being able to push and pull your opponents apart. And you want to do that in 1v1, but in 2v2 specifically, it's sort of interesting to note that the Zerg anti-air is way better than the Protoss and Terran as far as static versus Zerg anti-air goes, because the Spore does bonus damage to bio. AKA, like, if the Toss was here, I'd know for a fact I would be able to backstab him, but because I don't want to fight into multiple Spores, I have to pick my spots. So even though I know, oh, I'm not, like, it's not like he runs in and I'm like, now I'm going to kill him, I'm a badass. It's more like, I know that if I attack the Zerg in 2v2, a player will always put priority over defending his own shit than he will helping his ally. So even if I just run in and like helicopter dick my mutas around in a circle and don't kill shit, I just want to get the Zerg's attention. And see, we see he's trying to bring his shit over.
Swarm forces under attack.
And look at that, I just run away. So that's an example of knowing when you need to fight and when you don't need to fight. Remember when there was this battle going on up here, the blue Zerg players intelligently waited for a push to occur into the spines onto the creep. They didn't fucking fight way off here off of creep. Same deal here. You see the red Zerg is all in on Muta Hydra and is way behind you in bases and economy, and his Protoss allies doing even worse. You've run in and distracted him and allowed him to take more damage, and you've gotten away with it without losing anything. So you know what? Keep that vibe going. Like, especially, this is like the bread and butter of using mutas, is you take little advantages and you run away. That's pretty much what the muta is for. Like, you kill 5 workers, you run away. You kill a reactor in a tech lab, you run away. You pick and pick and pick and pick, and suddenly you're in an advantage. And this is obviously how you micro against carriers. You focus fire, shift click them. And I just want to say, like, this is sort of unrelated, but the micro against carriers, the way that the AI works, is fucking abominable. Like, no matter how well seemingly you focus fire, the units don't want to listen. They want to sit there and attack interceptors, which Blizzard just consistently makes cheaper and cheaper for no reason. So finally, because the carrier and lurker Muta army is so flimsy, and we're so ahead economy-wise, we can just run in and finish. You might be saying, like, well, why are you guys ahead if we just, like, look at all the metrics of, like, what is ahead and behind? Remember, this is the cost of playing aggressive. You don't simply get to open up 4-gate in-base charge lot all in, and then like, oh, I expanded, it's cool, I'm on the same foot after dealing no damage. That's like the main point of this video I really want to get across, is whenever people do aggressive builds, not just Zerg players in the larva mechanic, But even when Terran and Protoss do it cheesy, aggressive early game builds, you always have to give up something in order to be able to get those units out early or go for that tech path. It's not a matter of, oh, well, this race can simply do this build that's aggressive and very powerful and potent, but is also just as good economically. People always have to give stuff up. And that's why I was talking about canceling the third bases so much, is you can't look at it in terms of, oh, it's a normal like 2 base versus 2 base game. I can't afford to cancel my third. I'll be behind. No, your opponent's playing insanely abnormally. He's playing like a degenerate, a risky, gambling, low-life degenerate. And a lot of times, if you just can do a few one-off weird things that you would never ever do, like canceling your third as Zerg, for instance, when it was the whole point of your build, then you'll be able to hold these weird pushes. And again, we're going to see the aggressive cheesy player do what he does, go for another form of sort of surprise tech weird attack that if you were to hit someone in the mouth with when they weren't expecting, you could kill them. Like, let's think about the attacks this Overwork guy has done. A massive Ling Bane all-in where he completely cut workers, and if you weren't ready for it, you would have gotten run over. And like, really, even if you had the right units and were cutting workers, you might still have died. It was really only a double coordinated effort that helped the blue team win. So, and then after that, he made no units, he built a few spores, made no attacking units, went into 2-hatch mutas, surprise mutas. Notice how everything this guy does is predicated on some sort of surprise or gimmick or like shock tactic. The truly great Zergs, like the macro Zergs that are scariest to play against, these are the sort of players that you can know exactly what they're doing and you still can't do shit. This is the opposite of that. This is the cheesy Zerg. And in the same way that a cheesy Protoss or Terran player would try to keep you on the back foot and keep tempo, this is what these guys did. So just to wrap up the video, a few thoughts. When you scout early, look for lack of workers, look for missing stuff. For instance, if you fucking show up to a Terran's base and they like only have a barracks with nothing on it, like, you know they're hiding something. Or if you show up to a Terran's base and God forbid they only have a depot, oh baby, you're getting 2 racks. You should never put yourself in a position mentally where you think to yourself, well, this guy doesn't have the basic amount of stuff he has in his base because he's bad. No. You're like never ever gonna face people on the ladder who are like so fucking brain dead where that happens. In all cases, someone's hiding a base, someone's hiding tech, something weird is going on, you need to keep your guard up. You need to scout around with lings. Don't forget those fucking patrolling lings I had. This guy was a lifesaver. This made sure that I was never caught off guard by a hidden base trick. This is something you should implement in your own play. This was a long-winded guide, but it was one that was meant to help new players and really understand the mindset of aggressive players and how to combat them. Also, once you get to the mid-game, lurkers are really good just in general for playing against people like this. Easy.